I'm Sarah Wilson and you're listening to the Roots and All podcast. I'm here to help you get growing. Join me as I explore everything plant related both indoors and out and provide the information you need to create your perfect green environment. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the podcast. This episode is a little bit different because it features two guests and we are discussing apples. There's a bittersweet note to this episode as, having broken my front tooth in half as a child, I don't have a love of eating them fresh because my repaired tooth can't deal with the rigours of being sunk into the firm flesh of an apple. However, I do love them cooked and I like apple juice, and more than anything I enjoy them as trees, so it was with great interest that I read my first guest, Naomi Slade's book, An Orchard Odyssey. Naomi's book runs through the practicalities of growing apples, but it appealed to me especially because it's so beautifully written and because it asks us to reconsider how we view orchards, and particularly how we can use them within our communities. I started by asking Naomi how the book came about.
Well, it sort of happened organically. I've always been into tree fruit. I've always loved tree fruit. My grandmother grew apple trees when I was little, and I walked down the garden. I fell in love with this huge apple, and it was a huge fairy tale. It was as big as my head, and it became my apple, and I'd go and visit it very frequently, and I was captivated by it. And but all sorts of things about that time of life. My father would send me up the cherry tree in the garden in Bristol to pick the cherries, and my maternal grandfather would turn up with big trays of Victoria plums, which was, stuff of dreams for a 7-year-old. And so I've always felt very, very connected to orchards, to tree fruit of all descriptions. But as I got a little bit older, it dawned on me that my connection was very unusual. That it was French and South African Golden Delicious that were handed out with a bit of cheese in schools in the 70s. And then rather later, I was doing some painting in my mother's house, and some girls walked past and they were like, "Oh, look, cherries." And the other was like, "Oh, I don't think those are cherries." I was like, "Well, they look like cherries. Maybe we should try them." And then the other one went, "Oh, no, we shouldn't. They're probably poisonous." And I went, "What do you mean they're poisonous?" Well, I didn't go, "What do you mean they're poisonous?" because I was inside. But I couldn't quite believe that they couldn't, in their teens, identify a cherry. And that was kind of the germ. That was the germ of the idea, which I then picked up rather later.
What is the definition of an orchard, or what is the definition of an orchard as you see it? Because I think in your book you mentioned that they may come in different configurations.
Absolutely, yes. Well, an orchard, for conservation purposes, is defined as 5 trees with crown edges not more than 20 metres apart. And that's very much for conservation purposes for ancient orchards. Is this an orchard or is it not an orchard? But actually, if you repurpose that definition, 20 metres apart is a huge area. And in a small courtyard with modern dwarfing varieties, you could easily have 5 fruit trees, or 5 adjacent houses, each with a tree in its back garden. So, again, my book, An Orchard Odyssey, was about looking for fruit trees in the landscape and seeing orchards where there are aggregations of fruit trees that might almost be haphazard or incidental on the edges of allotments or along roads or canals or something. So it's about seeing fruit trees in a different way. So you get situations where, for example, a business has bought an old house in the centre of town, but they might re-landscape the gardens, but there may still be fruit trees in there. And if there are 5 trees within that space, then that surely could be defined as an orchard and enjoyed as such.
So your challenge is really to rethink the idea of an orchard. How does that benefit people? Can we make anything of the fact that there might be, trees on disparate patches of land? How does that work?
I think we can. There are various levels in this, the way I see it. And the key thing for me is to reconnect people with their orchard heritage. I feel that certainly until relatively recently, people considered orchards to be something historic and gone and sorely missed. A sort of a sepia retrospect, oh, they were lovely, but they're all gone now and I could never have one. But I think people really can have an orchard if they think about it in the right way. Fruit planting along front gardens, and community orchards, and even in parks and landscapes, you do get orchard trees. So it's celebrating the orchard trees, where there's a walnut tree park planted in a car park, for example, or a park which is somebody's put an ornamental mulberry in. I mean, ornamental mulberries taste very nice. I scrump them regularly.
Actually, what you said, I think, in the book is that you may have a fragment of an historical orchard near you. How would people know that? Is it just a case of keeping your eyes open?
Yes, I mean, very much it's about looking for them. I mean, the charge is very much to go and see the fruit trees that are in the landscape. I mean, you often see them, don't you, zipping down the motorways at this time of year. They're all dripping with beautiful golden fruit. But your mind isn't preoccupied, apart from the driving bit when you're zipping down motorways. But even as you walk around town, there might be a fig here or a kiwi there, or as I say, a mulberry or self-set apples in the park. And those are more haphazard, but Victorian houses, early 20th century houses, were often built on the sites of old orchards. And very often they left trees standing in the back gardens as existing mature planting. So you can look at old maps, you can talk to the neighbours. That's very, very important, actually. I mean, there's often orchards marked up on OS maps. Then there's things like street names and Orchard Close. I mean, sometimes it's a cynical marketing ploy from the estate agents, or sometimes it's a genuine reference to the fact that the road in question was built on the site of an old orchard. And then, of course, there are a range of online resources and organisations. There's the People Trust for Endangered Species and the Urban Orchard Project, for example. So to find your own local orchards is your own personal research project.
Oh, yeah, it sounds brilliant. How has our relationship changed with orchards over the centuries then?
It's evolved significantly. I mean, apples originated in the mountains of Kazakhstan, the Tian Shan Mountains, and they came down what would become the Silk Roads as early as the Bronze Age. There were mummies found in the Taklamakan Desert, which had fruit remnants on them. And they went down to Persia, and the specific varieties, they developed grafting there, so we could conserve specific varieties. And then it's thought that they were spread up through Europe by the Romans. And fruit growing has had its highs and lows throughout history. For example, the Black Death and the Viking incursions were bad for fruit as well as bad for people. But there have been some real high points as well. So, for example, around the Norman Conquest, a lot of new varieties came into the UK with the Normans. And then Henry VIII, I mean, he might have had rather suspicious and dodgy sort of marital relations, but he was very, very into his tree fruit. And he sent his chief fruiterer out to France, who came back with a great store of grafts, so they say, and cherries as well, and created wonderful, great orchards in Kent that then dispersed the varieties around the country. And the bulge in fruit growing and consumption lasted for several hundred years after his death. But more recently, in the 20th century, the apple orchards, the traditional, what we consider to be an old-style orchard, they suffered due to commercialisation. Dwarfing rootstocks were developed, and new sort of high-yielding varieties were developed, and it became more of a kind of rotational crop. Rather than something which was standing there for hundreds of years and just gradually replenished. And a lot of orchards were destroyed just because they became less efficient than the dwarf high cropping trees.
So what could we do if we wanted to conserve varieties that were local to our area?
Well, we could absolutely grow them. As I say, it's about research, it's about looking at the websites, it's about talking to local people, it's like looking to the local history. Very often if you go to a village pub or an older pub in a city, there are local old maps or the Ordnance Survey, all the resources I mentioned previously. So finding out what was local or regional or what was developed. I mean, a lot of the Victorian varieties are very localised. And you don't have to grow a great big apple tree for it to be just as valid and just as tasty. You can have them grafted onto dwarfing rootstocks or semi-dwarfing rootstocks for smaller gardens. You can combine with your neighbours, so everybody grows a different local tree, or set up that community orchard if there's a little bit of central land, perhaps in where there was a bit of space on a housing estate, or look around, look and see where a community orchard might be.
I love the idea of starting a community orchard. Is it easy to do, or are there kind of challenges involved in it?
Well, there's challenges involved in all sorts of things involving multiple people and gardening. But it's about planning. It's about coming up with a plan, a workable plan, and doing research and setting it up. So you have to find out what you want to achieve. It needs to be more than just a pipe dream. You need to think about where it might be, who might own the land, and whether or not that bit of land is actually going to be good for the trees to grow on. You might want to think what the orchard is going to be used for. Is it going to be for community parties? Is it going to be to create, put beehives in to create local honey as well? Can you exhibit sculpture in it? Can there be local schools use? With any community effort, the buy-in of the local population, the house owners, the business owners, the schools, even the local shops can be absolutely key. And there have to be plans in place of management and practical care.
Well, that moves on nicely to the second part of your book, which is actually about designing orchards. And obviously, I think most people would traditionally consider an orchard to be underplanted with grasses, possibly wildflowers. But as you just mentioned, you can use them to exhibit sculpture. You can use them for all different sorts of things. So what are some of the more unusual things that you've seen orchards underplanted with or used for?
Oh, gosh. In terms of ornamental garden impact, I really think that fruit trees are beyond par. It's just they are just the best. Even in a small garden or in a large orchard, the structure they have is incredible. And underneath them, you can plant all sorts of things. So small bulbs. My own orchards in West Wales are planted with swathes of snowdrops, and above that, the wildflowers come up on top. But I've seen them underplanted with camassias, for example, which is a very, very beautiful sight because they come out with that beautiful sort of illuminated blue at the same time as the pink and white apple blossom. So that's absolutely wonderful. But you can formalise that. So you could put them, for example, in a box parterre or whatever small leafed evergreen is not going to get eaten up by box moth. And then you could underplant with bulbs and then perhaps replant with something like asters and dahlias for later in the season. So you can surround them with seasonal flowers of all descriptions. I've seen them trained against the wall with roses, and they can all sorts of exciting and different ways to plant fruit trees.
Yeah, that as I said, that I think a lot of people might find that quite shocking because they do have this traditional view of orchards. Can you think of any in particular that are really good examples that people might be able to see photographs of?
Well, there are all sorts of places you can go and see tree fruit used in an ornamental fashion. There's West Green House in Hampshire. That's really nice. There's lots of beautiful espaliers around the veg beds. And also she's raised the crown of crab apples around the lawn. So that's very, very attractive there. Gray's Court near Henley has a very attractive orchard, which sort of segues into the veg patch also. And of course, Gravetye Manor in Sussex that's a very, very beautiful thing. And if you want to see the camassias in full spate in spring, then head down to Gravetye Manor.
I think even at Great Dixter, they've got a number of fruit trees in amongst their borders, and they work perfectly well underplanted with all sorts of things. So, yeah,
well, absolutely. Absolutely, yes. Putting them as border structure, border specimen, and just gardening around them, as long as you don't hassle the roots too much, they should do absolutely fine. And again, it's good use in a small garden to layer up that planting.
Definitely. I don't know whether they would be used more ornamentally in that instance or whether they would be seriously harvested for fruit, but I guess it depends what the access is like.
Yes, but the point of my book, An Orchard Odyssey, is that one needs to purpose the tree fruit and purpose the orchard according to your space and time and lifestyle. So if you've got a big space for a community orchard or a semi-commercial orchard, that's one consideration. There's no reason why that can't be used for bees and for sculpture and for wassailing. But if what you have is a small urban garden, then and you want to put trees fruit in amongst the herbaceous borders and the dahlias and sort of tucked in next to the roses, I don't see why that should necessarily be a problem, because then you have the varieties you want, you have the flavours you want. There's just that pleasure of going out and picking something lovely and ripe off a tree that you've grown yourself, no matter how small. And that's what it's all about, re-establishing that personal connection with the orchard that you want to have, the orchard of your dreams.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. So if you were putting them into your garden to try and help wildlife, are they noted for the amount of wildlife they do support?
Very much so, yes. And your traditional orchard is absolutely splendid for wildlife, and that's because it's undisturbed or relatively undisturbed over a long time. And as the trees age and die, they become they become good habitat for a whole range of beetles and insects and fungi and all sorts of things. And then they plant new ones in, so you get that sort of continuum. But even within a domestic setting, the blossom will still provide food for pollinators, butterflies, bees, moths. The birds will still be able to eat the fruit. You know, the beetles will still sort of fossick around. I mean, it becomes part of a patchwork. And I found when trying to make my own urban garden important for wildlife, that how effective it is depends on the amount of greenery and trees locally. So in many ways, to encourage the wildlife in your own garden, you need to encourage the neighbours to encourage wildlife in theirs. But even planting one fruit tree will provide nectar and pollen, and it will provide food for caterpillars and various things. And you know, it becomes a relatively undisturbed area, and that stability and connection with other tree fruit is quite important.
Yeah, agreed. Could you just tell us about the story of Johnny Appleseed?
Well, Johnny Appleseed is a really interesting character because when the pioneers got to America, they took a load of apples with them, and the European grafts didn't necessarily do so well in the very hot or cold or wet or dry American climate. But you got a lot of they also took lots and lots of seeds, which were very genetically diverse. And that's how the concept of American apple pie came by. I mean, apples aren't native by any stretch in America. But Johnny Appleseed created these little seedling orchards all the way along these routes. As the wagons rolled west, Johnny Appleseed, he walked hundreds and hundreds of miles, and he was a real character. And there's this wonderful image of this chap with his bag of apple seeds sort of stringed left and stringed to the right. And he's a real life folk myth. So he was sort of ragged but barefoot, yet saintly. And he was certainly itinerant. He was a sort of apple-growing tramp, really.
Fantastic.
And he was vegetarian and highly religious. I think he might have been quite unusual company. But in terms of making sure that the pioneer families, when they stopped pioneering and started building homesteads, and they could actually carry fruit trees with them for that comforting taste of apples. He sort of helped the pioneers keep fed and sustain their families in this very harsh and unstable new world. So he's a fantastic character.
Yeah, he's definitely worth reading up on, I'm sure. If people wanted to get hold of a copy of your book, or even perhaps see you giving a talk, where could they find out more?
My book is widely available. It's published by Green Books, and it's in all good bookshops, obviously, but you can also buy it on Amazon. And I do talks, if anybody would like to get in touch. So yes, and my book is very much about engaging with the tree fruit, engaging with the heritage, and thinking about it in a new way for lifestyle and for in landscape, and wherever you are, you can have that connection to orchard fruit. I mean, it's conceptual, but it's about one's personal journey. It's about mine and the journey of the fruit and the development and the history. And there's a lot of interesting stuff. So, but I think that as far as orchards go, you need to weave them into the gold of your choosing. And I really want people to go out and enjoy the fruit that's around them.
We should all definitely be enjoying the fruit that grows in our gardens and indeed in our local vicinities. Thank you to Naomi for taking part in the interview. And if, like me, you want more ways to enjoy your apples than eating them fresh off the tree, and particularly if you're concerned about food waste and are looking for ways to ensure your crops don't go to waste, you will love my next guest, Sassie Yassamee, who runs Eve Apple Press down in Hastings in East Sussex. Sassie has an ingenious solution to dealing with and preserving those crops that can sometimes go unused. I thought we'd start by finding out exactly what you do in your business.
Okie dokie. So I run a mobile apple press, and I also make apple juice for sale. It's as sustainable as I can make it business, and it's trying to help people just to sort of feel a bit differently about their garden fruit, because there's there are no sort of, we talk about food waste quite a lot, but there's no mention of the reality of our garden fruit waste. Whereas in years gone by we would have picked everything and used it, and nowadays people are just don't even realise that they could possibly eat their apples. They're going, oh blimey, can you eat them? Yes, yes you can.
That's quite scary. You can only go so far geographically. Are there other people doing what you do, or is your business quite unique?
I think it's really unique. I don't think that there are other people who do like a mobile service. I know that you can take your apples to places that are static to go and get your apples pressed, but I did a lot of research around this. So when I was researching, I sort of found out that you can go to farms or various places to get your apples pressed, or they might have a special apple day where you can take your apples. Apples are really heavy to carry, and you take your apples to a place, they'll do them for you, but you're not always guaranteed that you're going to get your apples back. They obviously, sometimes they'll just put them in a big load with a load of other people's apples, and you get a quantity of apple juice back. So my reason for doing what I'm doing is because of this whole having to cart things about, and then you've got to make a special effort to go there, go and collect your apple juice as well. But I just thought it was sort of going back to sort of more sort of traditional lifestyles of being able to do things within your community. So it saves people having to sort of cart their apples all over the place, and they get apple juice made on site. They help with it, so they feel really part of it, and so they can say, look, I've made a load. They can say that they've made their own apple juice, which is great. And so it's not like, I've sent it off somewhere. They get involved in the whole process. Often their kids take part, and it's a real nice thing to do as a family or as a group or community.
So you need to franchise it.
Well, that's ideally something that I'd like to do, because me testing this out here, it's great. It really works, and year on year there are more. Every client who I had last year, I've got 2 more because of their contacts, basically. So it would be really nice to be able to do something like that, to make this a thing that happens all over the country, because there are apples galore everywhere.
Yeah. So how many apples do you need to have? What's the sort of minimum requirement?
Well, I don't state a minimum requirement, but I can do sort of 300 kilos, 400 kilos of apples. There's a limit because of the sort of pasteurising aspect of it, but I let the clients finish the job off. But again, I've had some people who said, "Oh, look, I've just got some apples," and I don't want to see those apples go to waste, and I don't, and what happens is, like, next year they go, "Oh wow, well, I'll tell you what we'll do next year, we'll invite the neighbours, or we'll do something else," and so it becomes a bigger thing. So people often don't really know what to expect when they sort of see this thing that says, "Oh, get your apples pressed." They go, "All right then." And I've rocked up to some people's houses and they've just got a carrier bags, and I've just gone, "Oh, that'll take me 5 minutes," which was great. And then they realise that actually, so they said, "Well, next year I'll be much more organised and I'll get them all picked." I don't think they, because this is something that is unique and doesn't normally happen, that people, don't know what to expect. So, sometimes they have loads, sometimes they have very few.
And if you had a couple of trees of different varieties, can you bung them all in together? Does that matter?
They're apples, and
Right.
It's making apple juice. So I don't specify anything. I mean, my own apple juice that I make, it's a mixed batch because it is apple juice. It's not anything particular. It tastes of apples. It's apple juice. Mm-hmm. So people often that they go, "Oh, I've got some cooking apples. Can I chuck them?" And I go, "Yeah, just chuck it all in," because you get a much more varied type of taste with a variety of apples. Sometimes depending on what you've got, but often the mixtures of different types of juices that they've just more complex sort of tastes and flavours, and you just go, "Oh wow, I can taste a bit of that," and it's got this note. It's a bit like wine.
Yeah, it sounds exactly like wine, actually. Yeah. Does it tend to be individuals who approach you, or do you work for people who've got kind of orchards as well?
Well, yeah, all sorts of people. So I've got people who've got small orchards. I've got people who've got a tree. I've got so a whole wide range of different people. People who've got farms and got some apples and want their apples processed. Mm-hmm. So all sorts of different sorts of clients.
Yeah. So when you, as you said, you leave the clients to pasteurise it, how long could it keep for potentially if you did it right?
It's a year. It's got a year's lifespan.
Right. Okay. And do they provide all their own bottles and everything as well?
No, I provide the whole kit, so the whole service. So the first time you want your apples done, I'll provide everything that you need. So if you want to make cider, I've got the yeast. If they want to use yeast, demijohns, all the rest of it, I can provide all of that. And I also provide all the bottles because although you can use your own bottles if you want to, my pasteuriser fits a certain amount of my size bottles in, and they're all standard. They're a standard size, and it works really well. So what I say to my clients: keep your bottles, wash them out, and then next year you don't have to buy bottles off me. So the following year it becomes a cheaper service for them, and they're saving their bottles and their lids, and that works really well as well. And people really like to sort of feel that they're doing some sort of recycling with their bottles as well as with their apples. So it just becomes cheaper the first year, because you've got to buy all the bottles, and glassware is not cheap. It just makes sense for people just to keep hold of their bottles and reuse them. So that's another sort of benefit of using my service as opposed to taking them somewhere else, because other places don't let you do that.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it sounds brilliant because you just come and kind of do everything and it's all there and there really is no effort. It sounds amazing.
Yeah, that's the other thing, because I think it is an effort to go and pick your apples and take them somewhere, then have to go back and collect your bottles. But it's a really nice experience for people that when they get involved, and it's they like to watch it, they'll take photos, they'll sort of go, they'll phone people up and go, "Oh my gosh, we're getting our apples pressed," and it's it becomes really a really good thing. And once they've done it one year, they're quite I've got return clients and they really like it, and they've had this they've had their apple juice, they've given it as gifts, they just love saying, "Oh, these are from our trees, this juice, and it's good."
It sounds brilliant. So, if talking about the juice, if you if you had, I don't know, 2 carrier bags of apples and you came along and juiced them for me, how much juice could I expect? And would it depend on what type of apple they were?
It does depend on the type of apple, but on average, I say about 2 kilos of apples makes approximately about a bottle of juice. It's a little bit more than that. But again, if you've got something like a couple of carrier bags of stuff, and if you're local, then, save me coming to get all the stuff. I have to say, you can bring it round and we'll just do it here when I'm doing another batch, because it's heavy stuff to cart about as well. But
well, it is. Yeah. And is there a sort of set time that you can do it? Do you have to do it between, certain months of the year?
Yeah, well, apple season starts sort of August, although it's sort of slightly getting earlier and earlier. So sort of August to about sort of November, mid-November. I mean, different apples will ripen at different times of the year, of the season as well. So you do still get apples that are ready sort of later on in the colder months as well. So sort of end of November. Mm-hmm. And different apples will also store as well. So you could, not all apples store very well. So
no,
like the early apples, like the Discoveries, they're not good keepers. So they're great just to pick really early on, and they're a lovely sort of pinky colour. And it's just like, oh, wow, look. Apple season again.
And if they had been in storage, I'm assuming the juice content drops, does it?
The longer, once you pick an apple, if you leave it a couple of days, it does become more juicier. I don't, they unless they sort of really start to shrivel up. I mean, some apples keep their shape and form really, really well, and they're still good. For juice, but I don't tend to store apples. I'll store apple juice,
right?
Because it's again, it's you need the space, and I don't have the space for trays and trays of apples to be all laid out somewhere cool, and you've got to check them regularly because it's one bad apple, it makes the rest go as well.
So I heard you talking at a talk, and you were mentioning also that there were kind of orchards in the vicinity where we live where the fruit doesn't get used for anything. So are you also going around and collecting that type of fruit and making use of that? Yeah,
I just go anywhere that there are apples, basically. So whether it's people with a tree saying, "I'll come and take my apples," I try and do that, as a sort of community type of a thing. But it's more efficient for me to go somewhere where there's quite a few apples and take them, because then I can get larger quantities. But I'll go around and get sort of small bits and pieces from people as well. But yeah, there are plenty of orchards in the surrounding area that don't get picked, that do just sit there. So yeah, yes, there's a bit of scrumping going on.
And is it? This may be a daft question. Is it just apples? Can you do it with other fruit?
I've done pears and grapes. So the way that my equipment works, it doesn't work for stone fruit because you can't chop them up basically. So anything soft. So apples, pears, and grapes. Yeah, I've made sort of grape juice and pear juice for people as well. So.
God, yeah. It sounds amazing. So if someone was in the area of kind of Hastings, how far do you travel out, and how would they get hold of you?
I go into Kent. But basically, I mean, if someone just gives me a ring and just I sort of find out where they are, I'm happy to sort of go wherever is needed, basically, because it's their apples will just go to waste, and it's just nice to be able to make apple juice for people so that they can use their fruit. There was a bloke up in Tunbridge, but luckily he just wanted cider making, and that's cider making is just making the juice for cider. I didn't have to do anything. It very complicated. Just juice it and whack it into some demijohns or fermenting buckets. So rather than going to Tunbridge like for an hour's work, he came to his mum's in Hastings, and we just did it there, and it just took an hour, and it was great.
God, it's so easy to do. Have you got a website where people could get hold of you?
Yes, so it's Eve Apple Press is the name of the of my venture, and that's the website.
Mm-hmm. Brilliant. And is that .co.uk?
Co.uk,
Yeah, fantastic. I couldn't help thinking when Sassie was talking about other people's pressing facilities, where you take your apples along and they get thrown in with everyone else's and you don't know whose juice you get in the end. It kind of put me in mind of crematoriums and the story that when you get your loved one's ashes, they're mixed in with other people's, which is apparently an urban myth, according to Google, but I can neither confirm nor deny that. The links to Sassie's website and also to Naomi and her book are in the show notes. Thank you to Sassie and Naomi, and thanks to you for listening. If you have any feedback on this episode or any others, please do get in touch with me via email or social media. And please keep on sharing the episodes with anyone you think might be interested. And a very big thank you to my new Patreon supporters. You are making my life a little bit easier and I'm very grateful to you. I'll catch you next Tuesday. You can download or listen to the podcast direct from the website www.rootsandall.co.uk, where you'll also find my blog and a sign-up form for the newsletter, which gives you a weekly roundup of content, plus the inside scoop on things like upcoming guests. Or you can subscribe wherever you normally get your podcasts. Email me with comments and feedback at podcast@rootsandall.co.uk. Follow me on Twitter, Roots and All, Facebook, Roots and All UK, and Instagram, Roots and All Pod. But please also check out my Patreon, where you can make a one-off donation or take out a monthly subscription to help support my work, because if you like what I do, please help me to continue doing it. Even if you make a one-off donation of £1, trust me, it all helps and I will be immensely grateful. So please go to Patreon and search for Roots and All.